Katie, my best friend, raised an eyebrow as we settled into the comfort of my small but cozy living room, which was surrounded by bookshelves filled with fantasy novels, a true indicator of my passion for reading and writing. "Are you sure about this, Jessica?" she asked cautiously. Exhaling deeply, I tucked a stray hair behind my ear. "About marrying Henry? Absolutely. It's his family that's more complicated, especially his mom," I admitted. Katie's skepticism was palpable. "Mrs. Holland, right?" she asked, to which I could only nod in agreement. Henry's mother, Mrs. Holland, was truly in a league of her own, constantly interfering and judging. And her involvement in our wedding plans had been overwhelming. Just as we broached the topic, the doorbell rang, and Mrs. Holland entered, her presence as commanding as ever. "Jessica, dear, we need to talk about your wedding dress," she announced without a preliminary greeting. Bracing myself, I inquired, "What about the dress, Mrs. Holland's?" She dismissed my choice with a wave of her hand. "The one you picked isn't suitable. I found the perfect one yesterday. It's slightly above your budget," she stated, her tone brooking no argument. "Slightly's?" I pressed, fearing her definition of slight. "It's double your budget, but it's worth every penny," she declared confidently. I shared a helpless look with Katie. "Mrs. Holland, I can't afford that," I protested. "Nonsense," she snapped. "It's your special day. You should cut corners elsewhere. This dress is essential." Feeling cornered, I reluctantly agreed, knowing it would be less troublesome than opposing her. The following day, we visited the bridal shop. The dress was indeed stunning, but the price tag was nauseating. As I tried it on, Mrs. Holland gushed over how fabulous I looked, sealing the deal herself. "It's settled then," she announced, clapping her hands joyously. "We'll take it." I hesitated due to the cost, but before I could speak, she interrupted, "Don't worry. Consider it my gift to you." A wave of relief washed over me. Perhaps I had misjudged her after all. Fast forward to the wedding day. The dress was a sensation, and I truly felt like royalty. However, when I approached Mrs. Holland later about the dress payment, she conveniently backtracked on her promise. "Jessica, dear, I never said I'd pay for the whole thing. I just helped you choose, that's all," she claimed, brushing off my shock. "You must have misunderstood. Anyway, it's done now. No use crying over spilled milk." Stunned and feeling deceived, I realized Katie's earlier caution was right. I should have been more vigilant. On another seemingly ordinary Thursday, I was in my home office, the smallest room in the house, surrounded by my writing materials. It was my sanctuary, or at least it was supposed to be. The tranquility was shattered by the doorbell. Mrs. Holland, true to form, had arrived unannounced, treating our home as if it were a public space. "Jessica, dear, I'm here," she declared from the living room, not even waiting for me to come to the door. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself and greeted her, trying to keep my tone pleasant. "Hi, Mrs. Holland." "Oh, there you are, hiding in your little room," she commented, looking around with disdain. "You really should get out more, dear." Forcing a smile, I replied, "I'm quite busy with my writing." "Writing, scripting," she dismissed, waving her hand. "You need to live a little." "Now, where's the remote?" As Mrs. Holland settled comfortably on my couch and flicked on the television, a surge of annoyance bubbled up inside me. My home was slowly transforming into her preferred daytime escape. Trying to retain my composure, I addressed her, "Mrs. Holland, I need to focus on some work today," hoping my tone conveyed both firmness and politeness. She raised an eyebrow, her response dripping with condescension. "Oh, don't fuss about those little stories now. I need my relaxation. Plus, popping over here saves me quite a bit on my utility bills, you know." Her sheer nerve left me momentarily speechless. The situation escalated when she headed to the kitchen. "What's for lunch, Jessica?" "I'm quite hungry," she declared, as she began rummaging through my refrigerator. I trailed behind her, my irritation mounting. "Actually, Mrs. Holland, I haven't gotten around to making lunch yet. I plan to eat later," I informed her. Unperturbed, she shrugged and started pulling ingredients from the shelves. "That's fine. I'll make do. But you really should consider keeping your pantry better stocked, she remarked casually. There I stood, watching her dominate my kitchen and deplete my groceries. The intrusion was glaringly apparent. At that moment, Henry came home for lunch and was surprised to see his mother. "Mom, what brings you here?" he inquired, clearly caught off guard. "Just a little visit. Jessica and I are spending a delightful day together," she fibbed smoothly. I shot Henry a look, hoping he might intervene. Instead, he just shrugged and joined his mother in front of the TV, clearly choosing to remain neutral. Later, the setting sun cast a warm glow into my small home office, filled with fantasy novels and my writing. The coziness of the room contrasted sharply with my current frustrations. Abruptly, Mrs. Holland stormed in, her expression a mix of annoyance and scorn. "Jessica, why are you holed up in here? You act as if you're wedded to your computer. There's an entire world outside these walls," she criticized harshly. Pausing my work, I tried to maintain my calm. "Mrs. Holland, I'm working. This is my profession, my career," I explained. She scoffed loudly. "A profession? Sitting all day, conjuring up fairy tales? That's hard work. It's utter nonsense. Get a real job. Do something meaningful." Her words were cut, each one landing sharply. Before I could muster a rebuttal, Henry appeared, his face mirroring his mother's disapproval. "What's going on here?" he asked, leaning casually against a frame. Mrs. Holland gestured dismissively toward my computer. "Your wife thinks she's contributing to the world with these fanciful tales," she remarked. Henry looked at me, his eyes cold and judgmental. "Jessica, Mom has a point. This isn't really a job. When will you leave these fantasies behind and engage in something truly valuable?" A knot tightened in my stomach. "Henry, what I do is valuable. I am a writer. My work is recognized internationally," I asserted. He chuckled dismissively. "Internationally? Come on, don't exaggerate. How much do you even earn from these so-called books?" It's laughable. Fighting back frustration, I stood my ground. My writing is impactful. It's not merely about the earnings. Henry shook his head, pity etched on his face. "Jessica, passion doesn't pay the bills. It's high time you got a real job, one with a steady paycheck." Their conversation spiraled, each iteration slicing deeper, suffocating me with its intensity. My dreams seemed trivial under their relentless scrutiny. "I don't need to justify my career choices to anyone," I declared, standing my ground. Henry arched an eyebrow. "Defensive, classic. When you can't handle the truth, you run." I swallowed the sharp retort on my tongue, knowing it would only stoke their fire. Mrs. Holland, seizing on my moment of defeat, delivered her final blow. "Think about it, Jessica. We're only saying this for your good. Someday, you'll thank us when you're living in the real world." With those words, they left, abandoning me in my office surrounded by my books, my sanctuary, their harsh words echoing around me, a painful reminder of their misunderstanding and lack of respect. How much longer could I endure this environment, where my aspirations were merely a source of mockery? The future, once radiant with potential, now felt bleak and uncertain. It was a typical Saturday morning, one that normally promised relaxation. Yet for me, it marked the beginning of another dreaded weekend ritual. No sooner had the clock struck 9 than Marin, Henry's sister, arrived, her 3 energetic kids in tow. "Hey, Jessica. Hope we're not too early," Marin chimed as she entered, the children scattering through the house. "No, not at all. Good morning, everyone," I replied, masking my dismay with a smile. Marin, unaware of my discomfort, flopped onto the sofa. "Phew, what a week. I'm beat. These kids have driven me up the wall. Thank God for Saturdays, right?" I nodded, resignation settling in.
"Right.
"Would you like some coffee?" "That would be great. Thanks," she said, already distracted by her phone. Navigating a minefield of toys, I made my way to the kitchen. I felt more like a nanny and housekeeper than a host. When I returned with the coffee, the living room had descended into chaos. "Oh, Jessica, could you whip up some of your pancakes? The kids are starving." It wasn't a request, but an expectation. Sure, I'll get started, I said, my plans for a peaceful weekend evaporating. The kitchen turned into my battleground as I managed pancakes, coffee, and the chaos of kids. Amidst the flipping and serving, Henry walked in, his brow furrowed. Jessica, why do you always buy these expensive ingredients? We need to cut down on expenses, he grumbled, eyeing the breakfast spread. I sighed, frustration simmering. Henry, your sister, and her kids eat here every weekend. It adds up. He shrugged, dismissive. Well, they're family. You can make do with less fancy stuff to save some money. The rest of the day blurred into a cycle of cooking, cleaning, and catering to endless demands. By the time Marin corralled her children out the door, I was physically and emotionally drained. As I slumped onto the couch, Henry approached with a frown. You have to save some money on my nephews and my sister, he said. Incredulous. I stared at him. Me? You're the one who never says no to her. Henry dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand. I'm just trying to help you budget better, Jessica. It wouldn't hurt to be more economical, The irony was almost comical. There I was, orchestrating a makeshift weekend childcare and cafe, and yet he dared to preach frugality to me. The urge to yell, to make him see the inequity of it all, was overwhelming, but experience taught me that my words would be wasted. Once everyone finally left, and the house fell silent, that precious tranquility became mine alone. This was the sacred time I reserved for my writing, the few uninterrupted hours to pursue my passion. Just past midnight, I sat down in my study, the dim light of my monitor the only illumination, as I dove deep into the narrative worlds I crafted. Suddenly, the door creaked. Henry appeared, his face clouded with annoyance and exhaustion. Jessica, are you still up? Think of the electricity bill. I took a deep breath to calm myself. Henry, night is the only time I get to write. You know how busy our days are. He stood there, arms folded, his tone becoming harsher. Busy? Do you call taking care of your family busy? That's your duty, Jessica. This night owl routine isn't just impractical, it's costly. Consider our expenses for once. I couldn't hide my disbelief. Really, Henry? We're talking about expenses now. Not the fact that I'm giving up sleep and my well-being to keep my career alive. He scoffed. Career? That little side project of yours? Be realistic, Jessica. Prioritize properly. Frustration surged within me. This side project is more than just a hobby, Henry. It's my work, my passion. Why can't you see that? He shook his head dismissively. What I see is money wasted and a wife distracted by dreams instead of her family. His words stung fiercely. Standing up to face him directly, I asserted, writing is part of who I am. It's essential to me, and I won't just drop it because you deem it inconvenient. He snorted. Inconvenient? It's downright futile, a drain on our resources, and completely unproductive. The sting of his words was sharp, almost physical. I am productive, Henry. Just not in the way you want me to be. Why is that so hard for you to understand? He shrugged coldly, his indifference palpable. Maybe I'd see it your way if it actually made money. Until then, it's just a bothersome hobby. With that, he left, leaving me alone with my thoughts in the softly lit room, my vision blurred by tears. Struggling to keep my dream afloat felt lonelier than ever, especially without the support of the one person who should have stood by me. In the kitchen, the next day, tension filled the air. I was mid-stir when Henry walked in, his mother in tow, casting a shadow that felt almost literal. Marin and her husband need us to watch their kids for 3 weeks, he declared, the finality in his voice brooking no argument. I stopped stirring, shock freezing me for a moment. 3 weeks? Henry, that's a massive imposition. Mrs. Holland cut in sharply. It's family, Jessica. You don't turn away family. My frustration mounted as I thought of my deadlines. But my writing, I have commitments. I can't just drop everything to babysit. Henry's sarcasm was biting. You're writing? Please, Jessica. It's not as if you're crafting a masterpiece. Family always comes first. Desperate for any ally, I turned to Mrs. Holland, hoping for some support. Perhaps the children could stay with you for a bit? She recoiled as if I'd suggested the unthinkable. Me? Look after 3 young children at my age? Absolutely not. I had spent years dedicated to raising our kids, and the idea of needing another solution briefly crossed my mind, perhaps hiring a nanny just for a couple of weeks. When I suggested this, both of them stared as if I had sprouted an extra head. Mrs. Holland, with a dismissive tone, retorted, "Why squander money on that when you're already here?" Henry agreed, nodding. "Exactly, Jessica. We don't have endless cash. You need to think practically." I was stunned. Practical? You're asking me to sacrifice 3 weeks of my life, my work, for nothing, and I'm the one who needs to be practical? Henry's expression turned stern. "This isn't up for discussion, Jessica. This is what families do for each other. Aren't you a part of this family anymore?" A wave of anger washed over me. "No, Henry, I haven't forgotten, but it seems you've forgotten that I have my own life and commitments." Mrs. Holland scoffed. "Commitments? Those silly little writings? Don't overreact. It's just 3 weeks of babysitting." My voice rose in frustration. "It's not just babysitting. It's about my time, my career. Why can't either of you see that?" Henry's look grew icy. "Because, Jessica, in the real world, people don't just chase fantasies. They make sacrifices. They do what's necessary for their family." Shaking with irritation, I countered. "And what about what's necessary for me? Do my dreams and goals not matter to you at all?" He leaned closer, his tone threatening. "If you don't do this, Jessica, it's over. I'll file for divorce." "Is that what you want?" His words struck me like a slap, the threat of divorce looming like a dark cloud. The day the kids arrived felt like the calm before the storm. I watched from the window as Marin's car pulled up, her lively trio spilling out. Mrs. Holland greeted them warmly, the doting grandmother. It would have been almost funny if it weren't for what I had in mind. "Jessica, darling, could you help with the kids?" Mrs. Holland's voice oozed fake sweetness. I forced a smile, masking my brewing plan. "Of course, I'll be right there." Stepping into the living room, I found chaos already unleashed, the kids running wild, Mrs. Holland struggling to maintain control. "Finally, Jessica, I thought you'd never come," she snapped, her pleasant mask fading. Henry entered a mix of annoyance and relief on his face. "Jessica, make sure they don't wreck the place. I'm going to be in my office." I nodded, heart pounding with anticipation. "Actually, I need to step out for a bit. I'll be back soon." Henry scowled. "Go out now? Are you kidding me, Jessica? You can't leave us with all this." I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "It's just for a bit, Henry. I need to pick up some groceries. You'll manage, won't you?" Mrs. Holland glared. "You're being completely irresponsible, Jessica. This is not the time for your little shopping trips." Ignoring her, I grabbed my purse. "I won't be long. Keep an eye on the kids." I couldn't suppress a laugh as I closed the door behind me, their astonished faces etched in my mind. I didn't head for the store. Instead, I made my way straight to the apartment. Several days before relocating, I arranged everything and moved into my new apartment when the place was vacant. It felt like my sanctuary, a fresh beginning. As I settled into the sparse surroundings, a sense of relief washed over me. The laughter and newfound freedom were invigorating. I was breaking away from their stifling influence. I knew Henry would soon discover the divorce papers I left behind in my office. Imagining his surprise and anger gave me a twisted sense of pleasure. I had reclaimed my life. Calls and messages poured in from Henry, Mrs. Holland, and even Marin, but I dismissed them. I was finished dealing with their drama and self-centeredness. That evening, as I lay in my new bed, the quiet was a welcome change from the turmoil I had left behind. I reveled in the thought of Henry and Mrs. Holland being overwhelmed by the kids. Now, it was their turn to feel the pressure. The fallout from my departure was more intense than any plot twist in my novels. Friends eagerly relayed the chaos at my old home. One evening, my phone displayed Henry's number, and I could hear the pandemonium in the background. "Jessica, you have to come back. These kids are unbearable," Henry pleaded, his voice edged with desperation. I smirked, savoring his distress. Really, Henry? Sounds like you're enjoying yourself, I teased. This isn't funny, Jessica. My mom is at her wit's end, and I can't do this alone, he continued. I relaxed further into my chair, enjoying my moment of vengeance. Well, Henry, you should have considered that earlier. I'm not coming back to be your caretaker, I replied coolly. After a brief pause, he apologized, a rarity from him, but it did little to sway me. Sorry doesn't change the past, Henry. I warned you, I said firmly and hung up, silencing his further objections. Though the satisfaction was fleeting, it soon gave way to a profound sense of peace and liberation. A few days later, I met Katie for coffee. So, I heard Mrs. Holland called Marin, demanding she come back early to take care of the kids, Katie mentioned with a hint of mischief. I chuckled, sipping my coffee. Yeah, Marin stood her ground and insisted on her break. Can you imagine the drama unfolding there? Katie laughed. And your book, it's a sensation, Jessica. It's all anyone can talk about. Pride swelled within me. I had poured my soul into it, and it was my finest work to date. Leaning in, Katie lowered her voice. The main antagonist. She resembles your mother-in-law, doesn't she? I raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk dancing on my lips. Does she? I hadn't noticed. Walking back to my apartment later, I reflected on the significant strides I had taken. Leaving Henry and his overbearing family was the best choice I had ever made. I was finally prioritizing myself and my dreams. My latest novel was just the beginning. The villain, inspired subtly by Mrs. Holland, had resonated with readers immediately. My friends saw the likeness straight away, but for me, it represented more than just a resemblance. It was a therapeutic release, a way to conclude a painful chapter in my life.
A single mother household? That's not a good family environment, my father-in-law stated. I know, right? I wouldn't let my son marry from such a family, his wife added. I am currently being hit by such words from my fiancé's parents without any hesitation. Not only me, but they also make fun of and belittle my mother. This kind of family can go to hell as far as I'm concerned. I will make them pay the perfect price and drive them to the end of hell. My name is Dakota, 27 years old. My family consists only of my mother. My father died in an accident when I was young. He went to heaven, leaving only me and my mother. How could he leave us like that? While I was crying, my mother didn't shed a single tear and always smiled in front of me. My mother worked hard for my sake, and thanks to her, I graduated from Harvard University. Now, I work as an employee at a top-tier company and lead a busy daily life. My fiancé, Joseph, is 30 years old, 3 years older than me. He proposed to me after a year and a half of dating. I thought it was a little early, but I decided to marry him to make my mother happy as soon as possible. Today is the day to visit his parents. Oh, I'm nervous. Do I look weird? I asked. It's okay, you worry too much, Dakota, Joseph reassured me. But your parents are rich, right? I continued. Well, they're just wealthy. My grandfather was amazing and started a successful company, leaving behind a future fortune. Joseph explained and added, more specifically, my parents are what you call wealthy. My father, who inherited the fortune, now lives off investments alone. Despite what Joseph said, I was still tense. I wonder if it's okay. I only bought souvenirs from a famous place, but I hope they'll like it, I said, worried. It's fine, just bring something as meaningful, Joseph replied. Geez, I'm really worried about this, I said. For him, it's just a visit to his hometown, so it's quite relaxed. Meanwhile, I'm so nervous that it feels like my heart is about to jump out of my mouth. It's a marriage proposal. Shouldn't he be more nervous? I thought, irritated by his overly optimistic attitude. Before I knew it, we were standing before a big house. A big house after all, I muttered under my breath, and Joseph smiled proudly. My grandpa worked hard for it. Anyway, my folks are waiting. Let's go in. Following him, the glass entrance opened automatically, and his parents greeted us from inside. Welcome, you must be Dakota. Nice to meet you. I'm Joseph's mother, his mother said. Hello, I'm Dakota, I replied. You are so lovely. Please come in. I'll make some tea now, she said with a constant smile on her face, which put me at ease. His father was also kind to me. I heard you work in the same company as Joseph. That's amazing. A woman working for that company, his father commented. Thank you, I said, feeling uneasy with the expression a woman working for, but I managed to respond, thinking he was complimenting me. However, as we talked more, that uneasiness grew into something bigger. Well, deciding to marry Joseph takes some guts, Dakota, his father said. Huh, what do you mean? I asked, confused. Joseph's parents, or should I say we, are wealthy. Normally you'd feel a bit inferior and hesitant about marrying into such a different class, don't you think? His father continued. Oh, maybe that's true, I retorted. It seemed like my in-laws believed they were somehow special, and they kept insisting on their superiority. Even his mother, who was kind just a moment ago, started revealing her true colors as she spoke. It's true, isn't it? It's not like I came from an extraordinary family, but as you can see, I'm a real beautiful. That's why I could catch your father's eye, his mother boasted. Oh, I see, I replied, unsure how to react. Dakota, you are amazing for choosing to marry Joseph with your looks. I couldn't do it myself, she said, making it hard to tell if she was being sarcastic or genuine. I sent a look to Joseph for help, but he didn't seem to care at all. Instead, he joined in with his parents halfway. So, Dakota may not be a beauty, but she's good at what she does. I think she'll make a great wife. She's even well respected at work. For a woman, she is at least on par with me, Joseph added. Wait, is this really the same guy I know? When we're alone, he seems more mature and sweet. Maybe it's just because we're at his parents' place that he's getting carried away, I thought. While pondering over these thoughts, I managed to get through the situation and squeeze out a smile. By the way, did Joseph go to greet Dakota's parents? His father asked. Yes, I did. Don't worry, I did everything properly, Joseph replied. Dakota's parents are probably just ordinary people since they're not Joseph's parents, his father sarcastically suggested. Her dad passed away when she was young, but her mother raised her well, Joseph said. When he said that, Joseph's father's eyebrow twitched. Is your father passed away? How did it happen, Dakota? He asked with obvious interest. Although surprised by his sudden change in demeanor, I've decided to shed some light on my past. My father passed away in an accident when I was young, so my mother raised me by herself, I explained. So, you mean you come from a single-parent household? His father asked. Yes, that's right. My mother and I still live together, I replied. As soon as I finished explaining, Joseph's father looked troubled. His mother also made a disapproving face. Eventually, the two of them began whispering and exchanging glances. Is everything okay? I asked Joseph, concerned about their attitude. Then his mother said something unexpected. That's just impossible. Huh? I responded, shocked. Joseph, you should give up on marrying this girl. Mommy will find you a better match, his mother said. Wait, what do you mean? I asked, bewildered. His mother glared at me with icy eyes. Someone who grew up in a single-parent household is not suitable for Joseph, she stated coldly. That's right, Dakota. Even if you're capable of working, being from a single-parent household is a deal-breaker. We advised our son to choose his partner wisely, but he didn't listen, Joseph's father added. They spoke as if I were a defective product. I couldn't believe that I was being told such things by my future in-laws, whom I had just met. I wanted to stand up to their words. To my disbelief, even my fiancé said something that made me doubt my ears. I guess it's a no-go? I was hoping to barely pass, but I'm already 30 and it's too much trouble to start looking for someone else. I'll just settle for Dakota, he stated. What's that supposed to mean, Joseph? Don't you want to marry me because you love me? I asked, feeling my heart sink. No, it's not like that. I just wanted a wife who would take care of everything around the house, like a housekeeper. I couldn't possibly fall in love with someone like you, who has a bad upbringing, he said nonchalantly. That's right, his father chimed in, nodding and laughing along. I couldn't believe it. He was the one who I thought loved me and wanted to marry me. I couldn't keep up with the situation and couldn't even speak. Then my future in-laws delivered the final blow to my stunned silence. A single-parent family? How dare you think of marrying our son when you come from such a poor background yourself? Hear our plight. We can't let our son marry such a poor girl like you, his mother declared. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the harsh reality of their words. My dreams shattered and I stood there speechless and broken. In that moment, my pent-up emotions overflowed. It wasn't just shock. I couldn't contain the anger at them ridiculing me, my life, and my beloved mother. I quietly looked up and spoke out to them. I understand. We don't need to get married. Instead, please leave this place. Not only my future in-laws, but also Joseph was taken aback by my words. He asked me hesitantly, "What are you talking about, Dakota? Why are you suddenly saying such a thing?" "What? I'm telling you to leave from here," I said angrily. His father, who had been listening to our conversation, joined in. "You're right. It's not like someone from a poor family can tell us to leave," he added. "Dakota, your attitude is terrible, not just your upbringing. Who do you think you are?" Joseph's mother asked indignantly. I slammed the desk and stood up on impulse. "Do you know whose land this house is built on?" I asked. His father, confused, responded, "What are you talking about? This is the land my father inherited." I smiled. "Oh, really? Can you show me the proof that this land belongs to you?" I insisted. When asked for evidence, his father immediately began to panic. "Huh? Evidence?" Either he had no idea or he was hiding something. "What's going on? If you own the land, then you have evidence, don't you? For example, the document you inherited from your grandfather," I kept demanding. "There is no such thing. My father built this house, and the land has belonged to him ever since," my fiancé's father stammered. Jumping on the bandwagon, his mother also raised her voice. "What are you suddenly talking about? You are just a commoner. What do you know about land ownership? It's rude," she was puzzled. "That's right, Dakota. Stop making baseless accusations just because my parents didn't approve of our marriage," Joseph uttered. It was a waste of time to continue any further, so I decided to inform them of the fact. "Since you seem to be unaware, I'll tell you. Your grandfather had a lease agreement with my grandfather," I began. "What are you saying?" Joseph's father tilted his head in confusion. I had no choice but to explain it to them in a way even this foolish family could understand. "It was a lease agreement. It means that we lent the land to you, and the agreement stated that the land would be returned to us when the lease ended. We have simply followed the agreement for a certain period," I concluded. No, I've never heard of such a thing." "It's nonsense," Joseph's father retorted. "Nonsense. It's all very serious. I'll let you know that we have the contract, and whether it holds legal weight or not, it's the truth," I firmly stated. "That can't be true. After all, you are a single mother who lost her father," Joseph's father continued. "What does that have to do with anything? My grandfather, my mother's father, was a big landowner who leased land all over the place. Thanks to his income, my mother and I have been able to live until now," I said. "So much land?" he asked. "Yes, I studied law in college, so my mother and I double-checked everything. We found out that this place happens to be our land as well," I finished. The room fell silent, their mouths agape. It was unclear whether they understood what was going on, but it didn't matter. "So could you please leave as soon as possible? The lease has long since passed, and my mother should have sent a notice of eviction," I repeated my demand. "A notice of eviction?" He looked to his wife for confirmation, but her face turned pale. "I noticed we were receiving envelopes every month, but I didn't understand what they were for, so I threw them away. Could those have been?" she stuttered. "Oh, I'm sure it was those envelopes," I replied, glancing at my ex-fiancé's father. "We've been sending the notices for over 2 years now. So what do you want to do? Pay 2 years' worth of rent or leave? I'll let you decide," I suggested. "Wait a minute. It's difficult to make such a sudden decision." "Sudden? We've been reminding you for a while now," I uttered. "Please give us some time to figure something out." My ex-boyfriend's father got down on his knees and wept. "Our market investments have taken a hit, and we have very few assets left. We were counting on Joseph for support, but now we are not sure," he added. "There was no room for leniency anymore. I was willing to settle everything amicably if they had apologized after the marriage proposal was agreed upon, but now that they insulted my mother, I had enough. I won't tolerate them freeloading anymore." Upon being rejected, they began to tremble. Joseph, who had been the only one calm until now, suddenly changed his tone. "Hey, can we stop now? I'll marry you. So let's just forget about this whole thing. If we get married, we can keep everything the way it is," he stated. Is this guy for real? As if I would ever marry a loser like him. I don't want a man who insults his fiancée along with her parents. Sorry, but it's a no from me. I have no intention of becoming part of a family with a conceited man like you and his delusional parents, I said decisively. My words made him almost cry. Wait, are we really over? He stammered, his voice trembling. I threw him a quick glance and left their house. Although it had been a place with many memories, I knew I would never return there again. It's needless to say what happened to them after that. Joseph's parents were wealthy and boasted about it, but in reality there was almost no fortune left. It was obvious when they couldn't pay the 2 years' worth of land rent at once. In the end, they had to sell their land for their house and leave that land. Of course, the money they got from selling the house was used to pay off the 2 years' worth of land rent at once. It seems they lived without changing their standard of living for a while, but their funds quickly ran out. Now, the family of 3 lives in their small apartment. This incident quickly spread through the company, and Joseph lost his high position in the company. However, his parents rely on his income, so he can't quit the company. Joseph came up to me as I was leaving work one evening, worry and despair written all over his face. Dakota, it's my fault. I'll leave my parents and we can live together, just the 2 of us. I don't mind if it's a single-parent household. I'll even take care of your mother. The 3 of us, you, me, and your mom can live together. What do you say? He asked, desperation in his voice. I looked at him, my expression cold. Joseph, it's too late. I can't trust you anymore, and I can't put my mother through this. You need to take responsibility for your parents, just as you chose to do, I replied indifferently. Occasionally I receive emails from him, but I never reply. I cannot regain my feelings for him or believe his words. I am now looked upon with contempt in the company and talked about behind my back. I hope that Joseph will continue to languish in his plight. My name is Julia. I'm a 26-year-old office worker. It's my 3rd year of marriage with my husband, Jimmy. They say you start to see aspects of your partner that were invisible while dating after getting married. In my husband's case, it seems to be a strong dependency on his parents and a desire for their approval, a need to be praised and loved, I guess. He often urges me to visit his parents' house. When I accompany him, I end up doing household chores and miscellaneous tasks. It's a tiring visit just helping out his parents while Jimmy is in a good mood, and cherishing parents is important. So I try to stay positive, but it's pretty clear to me now that the most important thing to Jimmy is his parents. This realization hit me after a call from my mom. It was a Friday evening, just before we were planning to visit Jimmy's parents the next day. Your dad has been diagnosed with cancer, she uttered with bitterness in her voice. The word cancer drained the color from my face. I learned that blood was found in his stool during a medical checkup at work, and further tests at the hospital confirmed it. After a colonoscopy, they found cancer in his colon. I was shaking, unable to think of anything but the worst. My father had never been sick aside from the common cold, so my mother was understandably worried. My mom asked me if I could come home, and after hanging up the phone, I immediately went to talk to Jimmy. But his reaction was exactly the opposite of what I expected. What? Going to your family's place now? He asked, visibly upset, and added, Weren't we supposed to drive my mom around tomorrow? You can't just cancel plans like that. I was surprised by his reaction. My mother-in-law's ride. Why don't you do it? My father has cancer, and you're worried about a ride. Are you out of your mind? I responded, hurrying home, which clearly annoyed him. Jimmy, who had been happily preparing for the visit, snapped. The crazy one is you. I'm just doing a favor my dad asked for. There's no way I can say it's impossible now. Our conversation gradually turned into an argument. I'm sure his father's favor was just helping in the garden, and my mother-in-law's ride was only a 30-minute drive. Can't you just say my father is sick? I suggested. What? Prioritizing your family over mine? What a disgrace. Your reputation is my reputation. We're already getting weird looks when we visit, and now this will just lower our standing even more. My husband wouldn't budge. The odd looks from Jimmy's parents started when our visits became more frequent. I suspect it began when his brother and sister-in-law had a baby. We used to visit once a month, but it increased to 2 or 3 times. This change made his brother's family visit less. Jimmy's sister-in-law, River, seems to dislike him and avoids the house when he's there. With them not visiting, Jimmy's parents miss seeing their adorable grandchild. I guess that's the main reason for their gloomy faces. It's because your brother and his family find it hard to visit when we're there. They have a young child after all, I concluded. What can a 1-year-old do anyway? Unlike me, they can't even help out, he replied. Jimmy's childish argument gave me a headache. How can you compete with a 1-year-old? A cute 1-year-old grandchild is obviously more adorable than a grown son. Every visit costs money, and a son showing his reverence is nothing compared to the joy of a long-awaited grandchild, I explained. Jimmy was at a loss for words, but then he said firmly, "We're going to visit as planned tomorrow. If you can't listen to me, I have a last resort." And he took a paper from the bookshelf. What's this? I wondered perplexedly. He told me he was going to start divorce procedures. He even said he started looking for a lawyer. Stunned, I listened as Jimmy explained. I didn't want to do this, but lately you've been acting too cocky as a wife, complaining about wanting a vacation and not wanting to go to your parents' house, he stated. I only go because you want to, and wanting to relax once in a while is only natural, I retorted. That's the problem. As a wife, you should aspire to visit with me, but you only go when I say so. It's no wonder my parents give us weird looks when they see your lack of enthusiasm, he kept accusing me. After using me for his acts of filial duty, how could he say that? I wanted to scream and hit him, but I bit my back teeth and held back. This was not the time for such an argument. I have my complaints, but I don't want to keep my mom waiting any longer, and I'm going to my family's house, I said calmly. And Jimmy looked confused for a moment. Then his face flushed with anger. So you don't want to listen to me? Fine. Are you okay with divorce? He asked. Seeing him upset after he brought it up made arguing seem pointless. I understand your point, I said and stood up. What a pain. You should have just quietly listened to me from the start, Jimmy said. He seemed to misunderstand, thinking I had changed my mind and was going to obey him. He smirked in satisfaction as he cursed. I returned to my room and called my mom. She scolded me for not consulting her earlier and encouraged me to leave Jimmy. When I told her about the divorce the next morning, I left the house quietly with the bags I packed the night before. I was worried whether I could start the divorce procedure soon, but with a nothing ventured, nothing gained attitude, I inquired. They instructed me where to start the procedure, and to my surprise, the submission process was easier than expected. Arriving at the station near my parents' home, I met my mom and we headed to the hospital. The doctor was going to explain my dad's condition in detail. I was worried about hearing a limited time left, but thankfully they said my dad's cancer could be removed. Even when they said it was stage 2, I couldn't figure out what that meant. About 5 days after the surgery, my mother and I breathed a sigh of relief. Dad was supposed to be released from the hospital soon. When I told my dad about the divorce, he cursed and said, "That darn jerk." My mom flattered him, saying, "Thanks to you, we realized what a jerk he is early on." After which my father seemed to calm down. "I'll be living at your home, so I'll come visit you again," I said, and left the hospital. Back home, I realized I had left my phone off, ignoring any calls from my ex-husband. I opened a message from my sister-in-law, River. It started with her worrying about my health and mentioned that plans to choose birthday gifts for my mother-in-law and her son were interrupted by my ex. I didn't want to admit it, but it seemed my ex was seriously jealous of a 1-year-old boy. My absence had been passed off as illness, and no other explanation was given. If I leave it like this, I could be made to look bad. I should greet them well. Before leaving, I explained the situation to my mom and headed to my in-laws' house the next day. My ex had stayed overnight at his parents'. He came out yelling at me like a madman as soon as he saw me arriving just before noon. "Julia, where have you been? Wandering off without answering your phone," he shrieked. Just like I said, I went back to my family's house. By the way, I'm supposed to be sick at home, aren't I? Is it okay to be yelling like this? I answered as calmly as I could. When I kindly pointed this out, my ex-husband looked back with a caught-in-the-act expression. Sure enough, his parents, who had come out with him, made puzzled faces and said to each other, "Wasn't Julia supposed to be bedridden at home?" "I'm sorry for visiting suddenly. I wanted to say goodbye in person and say thank you for all the kindness I received, I began, and my ex-in-laws looked shocked. Divorce? Why would that happen? My ex-mother-in-law asked. Hey Julia, don't say unnecessary things, my ex began, but stopped when he saw his mother's suspicious look. The truth is my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and I asked to go back to my family, but he yelled at me for wanting to cancel the plans to drive you and threatened me with a divorce, I explained. What? That's terrible, his mother exclaimed in horror. No, it's not like that, my ex stammered, but shrank under his father's glare. I was told to prioritize my husband's parents over mine, but I was worried about my dad, so I accepted the divorce and went back home, I explained calmly. My ex-in-laws expressed concern for my father while my ex received stern looks. I didn't mean it seriously, I just wanted to motivate Julia. Taking a break instead of visiting on a holiday, that's lazy for a wife, he argued. His father scolded him. We thought Julia wanted to visit. If it's her wish, we welcome her, but what's this about forcing her and then speaking like that? A husband should care for his wife, he said firmly. So my in-laws mistook my wish for my ex-husband's demand. This revelation further exposed my ex's selfishness. He was now shrinking under his parents' scolding, but I wasn't done. Just exposing the way he treated me is still too lenient as a punishment. I took out my phone saying, actually, it's not just me. River has also been treated terribly by him. I had called River the previous night. When I told her about the divorce, she shared how she'd been mistreated by my ex. You insulted her looks, made crude jokes, I began. After the baby was born, you said she was ugly and would be banished. When you had children of your own, no wonder she's been avoiding you. Just yesterday you scolded her in secret, telling her not to be spoiled just because she's a wife and asking if she's still not divorced, I concluded. Really, River? I spoke to River, who was on speakerphone. Everything Julia says is true. I could hear her sniffling. My brother-in-law must be nearby. A quiet voice asked, Are you okay? Before switching to a clearer volume. Sorry, but after hearing all this, we won't be visiting you guys, my brother-in-law stated coldly and ended the call. Why is she being praised just for having a child? That's crazy. Suddenly my ex-husband cried out in desperation, but his father's response was cold. You're the crazy one, Jimmy, he concluded. Dad, I did it for you guys. Jimmy made excuses. There were a lot of tears and snot on his face. If you did this for us, you're in over your head, his mother said dismissively. Jimmy, facing cold looks from his parents, was stunned. Then realizing I was there, he yelled, Julia, it's your fault. A wife should defend her husband and you spilled everything, spitting while he yelled. I informed him, the divorce papers have been filed. We're strangers now. Eh? He blinked, seemingly comprehending the situation, his face turning pale as he lost his words. No one was there to help him anymore. I said goodbye to my former in-laws and left. As expected, Jimmy was kicked out of his parents' house. After his parents, his new dependency was apparently a female co-worker. He persistently followed her, trying to get her attention, and ended up being labeled a stalker and fired from the company. Unable to afford his apartment, he moved to a shabby one and lived a lonely life. River, who was my source, regularly updated me and seemed to enjoy sharing the news. She must have harbored deep resentment. After the divorce, River and I became friends, occasionally meeting for coffee. My father's surgery went well, and he returned home in good spirits. For now, I want to live happily with my parents, cherishing our time together. I made the decision to let my parents live in our house, Luke began. Plus, with your inability to cook, it's very inconvenient, he added. And then he had the nerve to ask me to leave. I couldn't believe it. He came up to me with a smile as if he'd accomplished something significant. It was so outrageous that I was speechless for a moment, but quickly coming to my senses I replied, I would never let my parents live in our house, but you decided to put your relatives in it without my permission. My voice shook with anger, and I added, And you want to evict me, the rightful owner? Luke's overbearing personality had annoyed me for a long time, but now it was making me nauseous. I couldn't continue this way with him. His entitled attitude and the way he behaved as if he owned the house despite not contributing financially had worn me down. I am Addison, a woman in my 40s, and I work hard to support our family. Luke, my husband, stays home all the time to do household chores. Although I appreciate his contribution, but his bossy nature has become unbearable. His demands, such as asking me to bring ice cream late at night, started to get on my nerves. When I refused, he would threaten me, reminding me of his imagined authority as a husband. This would make me boil with indignation. His constant need to assert his dominance and demand respect solely based on his gender infuriated me. Enduring his behavior in addition to my demanding job was simply unbearable. "I'm really tired," I finally told him, my voice barely a whisper. "I've reached my breaking point and can't continue living like this," I added, and decided to retreat to my room for some rest, seeking solace from the mounting tension with Luke. However, he wasn't pleased with my attitude and confronted me, demanding an explanation for my behavior towards him. "Why are you acting like this, Addison? You can't just walk away," he said, his anger palpable as he asserted his authority over me. Feeling utterly drained, I mustered a forced smile and apologized, hoping he would understand my exhaustion. "I'm just so tired, Luke. Please try to understand," I pleaded. Luke's disappointment in me was only growing, and I didn't have the energy to argue. I apologized once more and withdrew to my room, my spirit crushed by his overbearing behavior. Day by day, I endured Luke's tyranny, worn down by his constant demands. Then my breaking point came when I felt really bad. I had a fever and a stress-induced fever. Unable to move, I had to take a day off work, lying in bed too weak to care for myself. When I told Luke about my condition, he brushed me off, accusing me of making excuses and refusing to help me. "You're just being dramatic, Addison. You can still get up and do your chores," he said, his words cutting deep. Alone in my room, feverish and weak, I endured a night of unbearable pain. In my delirium, I wished for an end to my suffering. I longed for a simple gesture of care from Luke, a cold compress, or even just a comforting word, but my desires remained unmet, leaving me drowning in a sea of loneliness and self-doubt. Questions plagued my mind. Why am I the only one subjected to this torment? What have I done to deserve such treatment? The agony of my situation, coupled with Luke's callousness, weighed heavily on my soul, pushing me to the brink of despair. I couldn't help but wonder why things couldn't just work out with Luke. The pain from my ongoing ordeal brought me to tears, and when my fever finally subsided after 3 days of rest, I had to return to work. My colleagues and bosses showed genuine concern, asking if I was truly all right. "Are you okay, Addison? You look exhausted," one of my colleagues said, their kindness contrasting sharply with Luke's attitude. Their compassion moved me to tears. I felt I was reaching my emotional breaking point. A voice inside me screamed that I couldn't endure Luke any longer. I knew deep down that you can't put that much pressure on yourself, that someday I would reach my limit. Yet, in my overwhelmed state, I couldn't gather the strength to confront the situation or contemplate preparing for a life without Luke. My affection for him had long faded, but the complexities of our shared life left me feeling trapped. Each day I worked tirelessly, returning home only to be tossed around by Luke's whims. This cycle persisted, draining me both physically and emotionally. Then one day, while I was trying to find solace in my room, Luke summoned me. It had been ages since we had a serious conversation, and his unusual excitement piqued my curiosity. "Addison, we need to talk," he said, his voice unusually eager. As I settled down for the discussion, Luke, with a fervor I hadn't seen before, dropped a bombshell. "I intend to let my parents live in our house. And by the way, your inability to cook is very inconvenient," he said, his callous remark stinging me. What struck me even harder was his plan to force me out. "I want to change the house's ownership to include my parents, divorce you, and start a new family," he declared. "These decisions are final, and your objections won't change a thing," he concluded. I was unable to comprehend the decisions he'd voiced and felt a wave of dizziness come over me. "Why can't we live together with your parents?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They would love to be close to me again," he stated calmly, ignoring my emotions. "Addison, As the man of the house, it's my decision, Luke replied arrogantly, completely ignoring my words and feelings. I knew I couldn't continue a relationship with him any longer. It was just unbearable. Luke chuckled dismissively. Your love for me blinds you. I only want to take care of my family, he uttered playfully. I haven't had any affection for him in a long time. I've already fallen out of love with you, I said quietly. All that remains is my astonishment at your selfishness and my regret for not ending things sooner, I added. Luke seemed to misunderstand, assuming my reluctance for divorce meant lingering love. If you leave, you'll be on your own. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice wavering. To clarify my feelings, I declared, I'll leave. Luke, clearly unprepared for my agreement to a divorce and my willingness to leave, was stunned. You won't manage without me, he said, trying to regain control. I've already fallen out of love with you, I repeated and continued. Letting go of what's not needed feels liberating. My words hung in the air, leaving Luke looking utterly lost. I nodded, thanking him for everything, and walked away from our house. Back at my parents' place, I explained the situation to them. Their initial fury at Luke's behavior subsided when they realized I had a plan. With their support, I began the healing process. The first step was the divorce. After sending the papers, Luke messaged me expressing uncertainty about the situation. I clarified my feelings, and he went silent. A few days later, I received the completed divorce papers from him. I promptly filled out my parts and submitted them to the county office. Now Luke and I were complete strangers. I no longer had the responsibility of supporting the household as his wife. During the divorce, we divided our assets. Luke claimed the house, a burden to me from the start, so I gladly gave it up. Instead, I opted for alimony. Since Luke wasn't working, his parents covered it, but he seemed to be actively job hunting, probably planning to repay them once he found stable employment. However, reality had a way of challenging even the best-laid plans. A month passed since the divorce was finalized, and I moved into a new home, enjoying a peaceful life. Then I received a call from Luke. Annoyance bubbled within me, but ignoring him might create more problems, so for the sake of my own future, I decided it was time to address the situation. Hello, what do you want after all this time? I answered the phone. My self-control was at an all-time low with him. His desperate plea for help barely registered as I urged him to get to the point. Please help me, he implored. His tone, though desperate, only elicited a cynical laugh from me. I anticipated Luke being in a tough situation, but the severity of his predicament surprised me. Well, what happened? You have to tell me or I won't know, I said, though I had a hunch about Luke's troubles. I wanted him to confess the details himself. Reluctantly, confused and stammering his words, he began to explain. I became the full owner of our home. I managed fine for a month, but I recently struggled to pay the rent since I'm still unemployed. I thought my parents, who live on a pension, could cover the expense, but the bill was much higher than expected. Around $1,800. They can't afford it, and they're furious. They approached me, and now I don't know what to do. I reached out to you because I'm lost and desperate, he concluded unhappily. Despite the frustration bubbling within me, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction, seeing him face the consequences of his actions. He blamed me, expressing his displeasure that I had not warned him about the ground lease. I acknowledged my mistake, but reminded him that his ignorance about the monthly cost was entirely his own doing. You treated me like an outsider and pushed me away, and now you're reaping the consequences, I firmly stated. Surprised at his impertinent call, I listened as he continued his plea for help, persisting, seemingly oblivious to my feelings. I need your help. We can't go on like this. Luke's voice carried a sense of urgency, highlighting their desperate situation. It was evident they felt cornered. I surmised that the rent due date had likely passed, and they might already be behind. Given the landholder's notoriously hot temper, I remembered the stern warnings about never being late with rent payments while I lived there. Missing a payment could result in dire consequences. Luke, who was well acquainted with the landholder, understood this perfectly well. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You still care about me, right? Luke's words were laden with selfishness, expecting me to help just because we were once married. I wanted to tell him that my feelings for him had long faded, but I held my tongue. Instead, I coldly replied, "I'm sorry, but do I have any obligation to help you? You were the one who left me. Isn't it a bit too convenient that you came to me for help right now?" Luke attempted to defend himself, pleading for understanding. "Please don't be so cold. I really can't do this without you. Whether you still love me or not doesn't matter now. We used to be married. Can't you help me out just this once?" he begged. "No," I stated firmly, my patience wearing thin. "It's been a long time since I stopped loving you. You left me, and even before that, my feelings for you had already cooled." My response carried the weight of frustration and despair that had built up inside me over time. When I uttered those words, I could hear Luke's dejected voice on the other end of the phone. It hit me like a tidal wave of disbelief. For so long I endured everything: his selfishness, his taking me for granted, his mistreatment, and even his indifference when I was sick, all in an attempt to salvage our marriage. I had invested my efforts into making our life together work, but this was the outcome. The question that haunted me was why I hadn't left sooner, why I hadn't distanced myself from Luke when my love for him had faded. Regret flooded in, mingling with the anger I felt towards him. Throughout our time together, Luke never truly faced me. He never showed concern, never tried to protect me, and never considered walking through life hand in hand as a couple. Every time he treated me like a maid or a money-making machine, he remained oblivious to my despair. Yet despite all this being a result of Luke's actions, he had the audacity to plead for my help as if he were the victim. His attitude felt so self-centered that it was nauseating. "Please help me. I'm begging you. How about we get married again? This time we'll start over properly. I promise I'll never kick you out again," he said in desperation. I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly at his desperate proposal. "Remarry you? Are you kidding me? All of this is the result of your own actions. I've been trying for a long, long time to connect with you. I kept trying to make you face me. Now you're telling me to start all over again with you, pretending that none of that ever happened? Do you want me to go back to those hellish days? That would never happen. I'm not going back to that life no matter what," I exclaimed, my emotions boiling over. Tears began to flow in a mix of anger and sadness. Luke remained silent in response to my words. Unable to bear any more of this conversation, I simply said goodbye and hung up. After that, Luke didn't call. Wanting never to hear his voice again, I blocked his number. Later, I heard from mutual friends that Luke and his family got evicted from their home. In his own way, Luke tried to talk to my former in-laws and get them to pay the rent on his behalf. However, they were furious, stating, "That's not what we talked about," and refused. Luke hadn't had much luck finding a full-time job, so he was working part-time to make ends meet. Apparently, because they had been living together, my former in-laws had to sell their house and were now cramped in a rundown apartment, all three of them. As for me, I became engrossed in my work. My boss even discussed a promotion with me. It seemed I might be the first female manager in our company, and I received admiration from both colleagues and juniors. Sometimes friends asked, "Are you going to get married again?" To be honest, after being forced into that kind of life, I had a negative view of marriage. The idea of dating a man or getting married again didn't appeal to me. But life was long, and there was no need to rush. At my age, many people live the rest of their lives unmarried. If I could live my life without regrets, that's all that mattered. If I could live true to myself, that was enough. With that in mind, I wanted to continue walking through life at my own pace.